Today's daf is daf Ayin Hey, and we'll start with the Kama Rabim on the second line. We said that if a person takes a neder in public, then there's no hafara for such a neder. So how much is Rabim? What makes public public? And here we have machlokas as to what the exact minimum number is to establish a neder as aldas Rabim. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Shlosha. In the presence of three, the neder is already a neder al das rabim v'ein lo hafara. And we derive this from Tumas Ziva. The Torah says, v'isha ki yazuv zov doma yomim rabim. And we darshan yomim shnayim. Because the minimum of a rabim, of a plural, is always two. And then it says, yomim rabim. So we add another one. Rabim jacks it up from 2 to Shlosha, which means that a woman has to see Dam during Yemei Ziva 3 days consecutively, which is called Yomim Rabim in the Torah, in order to contract Tumas Zava, which means she needs Zayin Nikiyim. And the same thing in parallel in the case of a Neder. What's Rabim? Rabim is Shlosha. You go beyond plural, that's 2 to 3, and the neder in front of 3 is a neder al das rabbi. And that's the opinion of Nachman. Of Yitzchak Omar, Asara. Rabbi means in the presence of Asara. And that's what we know from the halach of Kahal and a tzibur for a minyan and so forth. And this is derived from the pasuk Edo Ksiv Bahu. It says, Ki nishbu lahem in the Givonim, they took a shvua that they wouldn't destroy them. And it says there, ha-eda, nesiya ha-eda. So eda is always equated to kahal, and it requires a minimum of 10, like we find in the Meraglim. It says, Ad masay la-eda hara zos. There were 12 Meraglim, and the Eda Ra, if we subtract Yeshua Kalev, is 10. So Eda is a minimum of 10 people. I'm not sure why Rav Nachman rejected this drasha of Eda, which seems so much more straightforward. In the footnote here, in the Masechet, he quotes the Ritva, had it been in the presence of Eida, that would be correct, but it says Nesiya Eida. And now the Gemara goes back to discuss Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar. And we have a brisa. Rabbi Meir Omer called Neder Shetzorach Hakiras Chacham Lo Yachzir. If the neder requires that the chacham analyze the neder and come up with either a tos or a charata, then according to Rabbi Meir, lo yachzir. Whereas Rabbi Elazar Omer, lo asru, lo yachzir, meaning you can't remarry her. And Rabbi Elazar says, no, lo asru sarich. So the Gemara is going to analyze what these words mean and what this machlok is all about. Which means that a husband doesn't mind if his wife will have to go to a chacham to be matir on that. He's not matir on that. Therefore, if he divorced his wife because she was an oderes, and she took the darim that require chakiras chacham, only a chacham could be matir them, then we will not allow him to remarry this woman. And the reason for that is because we're always afraid, we suspect that after she marries someone else, he'll be makalkel him, he'll be makalkel her, because supposing she shows up at a chacham and he's going to be matir the neder. And we said that Hatoras Chacham is Matu Mafreya. So the Baal is going to say, the first Baal, that had he known that she would get a heter from a Chacham on the Nidarim, he never would have divorced her. The whole divorce was based on a mistaken premise, and therefore he's going to calculate any children that she has from the second husband. A person is makbid, he doesn't want his wife to go to a Chacham to be matir her neder, and therefore he won't be able to be mekalkel her. He won't be able to argue that if he would have known that her nedarim would lend themselves to Torah, he never would have divorced her. What do you mean if he would have known that the Chacham, she goes to a Chacham and he'll be matir the neder, then the whole divorce on false premises? Well, guess what? He's makbid and he doesn't want her to go to a Chacham. Therefore, in his das, he expects that this neder is going to be a valid neder without hafar, without being undermined. And according to Rabbi Lazar, when the Chachamim said that a man cannot remarry his wife after Nedarim because she has Nedarim, he didn't refer to those Nedarim that require a Chakiras Chacham, because in that case there would never be a Kilkul, because the husband would never allow his wife to go to a Chacham. But if, on the other hand, when we talk about Nedarim that don't need a Chacham, meaning Nedarim that the Baal himself could be made for, because the Nidre Inu Nefesh or Nedarim Beinot Leveina, then in such a case, we have a chashash that he's going to claim that had he known that his hafara would be meaningful, he never would have divorced her. So he's going to be mekalkel. So in any case of Nedarim, let's say, for example, in Nedarim, shetzrichim chakiras chacham, Rabbi Lazar would only say that he can't remarry her because of Gzera. You might confuse that with the case of Nedarim she'enam tzrichim chakiras chacham. Now, all this is going to be a source for Rabba's statement that we had on Daf Ayin Daled Omid Beis, that Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Meir are arguing on this svara whether a man is makpid with his wife going to a chacham or whether he's not makpid. And this was the way that Rabbah, back on Daf Ayin Daled, reconciled what seemed to be a contradiction between the brisos. In the case of a woman who was married on a Tanai that she doesn't have Nedarim, and then we found that she has Nedarim, and she went to a Chacham to be matir Nedarim. But although Rabbah had that reconciliation of the so-called steer in the brises, Rabbah wants to suggest now an alternative reconciliation. Rabbah Omar Hacha Be'isha Chashuva Askinon. When the brises says that if she goes to a Chacham to be matir her neder, then Eina Mekudeshes, that's because it's an Isha Chashuva. And he may want a situation where if he divorces her, he would want to marry one of her relatives from this Mishpacha Chashuva. So the Isha Chashuva Bas Gidol Maskinon, and even if the Baal in general is not makpid, if his wife would go to Bezdin or to a Chacham to be matir Hanedarim, nevertheless, the Kiddushin is not going to be valid. We have a svara to say in Umdana that the Baal would not want this Kiddush to be chal, because if it does, then he's going to have to divorce his wife, and he'll never be able to marry her relatives because those will be krovos krushasa. The Amar lo nichali the itzar b'krovosela. So if he wants to be able to allow himself to marry one of her krovos from this mishpacha chashuva, then he's going to make the claim, I don't want to be married to this woman who's a nadranit. On the other hand, I don't want to divorce her, because then through the gerushin, I won't be able to marry her mother, her sister, any other close relatives. And these are miyuchasos. And therefore, in the case of Isha Nadranis, I don't want this Kiddush to be chal. From the get-go, I want to just completely negate the Kiddushin and allow myself the heter to marry one of her relatives. And that means that even if she would go to a chacham to be matir her, that's the second one. The first brisa, where we said that if she goes to a chacham and he's matir the neder, then she is mekudeshes, because the Tanai was mekuyim, because the heter chacham is mafreya. That was the case of an isha she'ena chashuva, and he doesn't mind if an isa is generated on her relatives when he divorces his wife, and therefore, if the chacham was matir the neder, then the kedushin achal. And now the Gemara rejects Rav, or objects to Rav. If you're telling me that the Bryce is talking about a case where she went to a chacham to be matir her neder, and yet she's not mekudeshes because she comes from a mishpacha chashuva sefer. Let's read the last part of the brisa. The Ketani, it says, "Aval who is referring to the man who married his woman almanah she'ema aleh nedarim, and it turns out she has nedarim. Shaholach itzel chacham v'tiro." After the kiddushin, the husband, went to a chacham and he was able to be matir her neder. Or a similar case would be, let's say he was mekadesh almanah she'ema mumin. She turns out to have mumin, and then he goes to a rofe after the kiddushin, the repay also, and he was able to fix her up and heal these mumin, the kudeshes. So in both the case of the Durham and in the case of mumin, she's mekudeshes. And this is not similar to the previous case where he's mekadesh al t'nai she'en bo nedarim o mumin, where she's not mekudeshes. Now, if the Reisha is talking about an isha chashuva, and that's the reason why the kiddushin are not valid, they're not tofes, is lisnei, the Tana should have had even in the sefer, in the case of the t'nai shel nedarim, eina mekudeshes. We're talking about an isha chashuva. And if so, he doesn't want the Kedusha to be chal. V'lema, therefore, even in the Sefer, it should have said exactly the way we interpret the Reisha, Hacha b'yadam chashuv, and we're talking about a person who comes from a mishpacha of gedolim, mishpacha miyucheses askinon, and that's why the Kedusha on chal, because she is going to make a cheshbon and argue that lo nichali de'itza b'kreven. I don't want to exclude the possibility of marrying his relatives, let's say his brother or his father. And therefore, she's going to make a declaration. I don't want to live with him. He's got nedarim. On the other hand, I don't want to get a get from him because then I'll be asur al krovos. So the Gemara says, "Iu becholdu nichale," she would still want to be married to him, even if it means that she'll have to give up her possibility of marrying one of his relatives, because becholdu nichale. She wants to live with her husband. That's it. She wants her husband. She's not going to start making cheshbonos. Well, I won't be married, and then maybe I'll marry one of his relatives. And this is the famous dictum of Reish Lakish. At the beginning, I think it's the second parak of Kiddushin, if I remember correctly. The Reish Lakish tavu beis hatandu v'leis ha'armul. A woman would rather live with two bodies, meaning a marriage, rather than sitting alone as a widow without any husband. And she's, now my Rebbe used to always point out that this is based on the metaphysical kloa of that was given to Chava el Ishech Shukasech. And therefore this taina that she doesn't want to be married to him, because then if she gets a get, she'll be asur l'krovos. That's not a taina, because she's noach with a bal kolshu. And Abai is going to take this even a step further. Afilu the shumshim or gavra. You want to talk about pipsqueak, a very small man, very short, like a midget almost. So you say he looks like an ant. But nevertheless, even though he's so small, Kursaya Be Charasa Ramile. She'll put him on her special chair. Meaning she'll uplift him as if he was, one of the Sarim. He's a great officer in the king's palace, and she's married to the officer in the king's palace. No, that she builds up her husband, and it builds her up as if she was sitting with the Noshim Chashuvos. And even a Baal like this, she's willing to be married to him, and she's not embarrassed about him, even though he's small as a peanut. She doesn't want to remain without a husband. Rav Papa Amar, even a woman, the nafsa gava, her husband's occupation is that he's in charge after they take the wool off the back of a sheep. His job is to clean out this wool, make sure that there's no psolis in the tzemer. And this is considered in the sociology of that time an umnus ma'usa. It's like the lowest kind of job that you can take. And nevertheless, tikraya b'sipe bava v'teseh. She'll call upon him to sit with her on the threshold, outside the threshold of her house in public, and she's not embarrassed with the fact that he's occupied with such an umnus shvela. I'm not sure why the Gemara needs all these different comparisons. In any event, Rav Ashi Omar, even the Kalsa Gava, even if her husband comes from a family where there's talk about psul, the shevetz psul, like as if there was mamzeris in the family there. And the word kolsa, Rashi points out, comes from a pasuk in Yechezkel, the kolsa l'chol harotzos. And loboi tlafche likidra. She doesn't even ask him to supply her with a pot of cooked lentils, which is the simplest kind of food that you can get a hold of. It's very cheap. She's not going to make any demands on him. All she wants is that her husband is called the husband of this wife. Tana, we learned in a Brisa of a Kulan, all the women that are married to the lower chusos and shpelim, and yet they showed like outwardly a love towards these husbands. That's because the husband in this case is a front. What does that mean, a front? Shemizanos v'tolos b'balein. They go out and have a relationship with another man while they're married to this lower person. And if they become pregnant, they'll claim that it was from her husband. This is how they cover up for this news. The Mishnah says, Kol ha'mulim she'post l'bekon and post l'benoshim. Tana, we learned it by so sifu aleim, that there are mumim that passel noshim, but not kohanim. And those are the following three: Zeah, Shuma, Perech HaPet. So we're talking about a woman who excessively sweats, or she has some sort of a blemish. We'll see where the blemish is, or she constantly suffers from foul mouth odor. Bahani, Bakani, low costly. Are you telling me that these categories do not possible according from working in the base on Mikdash? But now we learned in the Mishnah. Second. Of Abachoros. Right, Masechet Bechoros has a whole section that's dedicated to the Mumin, the apostle according from Avodah, and it says there, Zokin v'Cholav ha'Mezoam. So Zokin is not capable of doing the Avodah. Chol is he's shaking. But what's Mezoam? Utnan. In another mission, it says Mumin Elu. So now we're talking about officially a behemoth that has a mum and is possible with carbon, but the Mishnah is going to go ahead and talk about the psul not only of the behemoth but also to Adam. And it says in the Mishnah, Bein Kfuim, Bein Ovrim, Psulim, and then it says Ba'adam. Ba'adam means even Ba'adam. It passes the Kohen and disqualifies him from doing the avodah in the Mikdash. And one of the categories here that's mentioned is Mizoham. And the assumption is that Mizoham is something repulsive. It's either Zeya, constant excessive sweating, or Reach HaPeh, and apostles in Kahuna. So why does the Brisa say that these women are exclusive to Nashim? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Lo kasha kan b'zeh overes, kan b'zeh she'ein overes. So with regard to a Kohen, the only time that Zeya, which is called Mizuam, would disqualify his avodah is only if it's perpetual, it's constant. Which means that while he does the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, he's going to be sweating profusely. And therefore his avodah is disqualified. But in the case of an Isha, even if she has Zeya, excessive Zeya from time to time, it comes and goes, nevertheless, it's going to passel her because she constantly, always has to be suitable for marriage. It's not like the Kohen whose problem only arises at the time of the avodah. So you have to talk about Isaiah Shein Overes, so that you guarantee that he'll break out in sweat when he does the avodah. In the case of the Isha, even if it's only occasional, it doesn't matter because that's going to undermine the relationship. The relationship is 24/7. Rav Ashi Omar, very similar answer. I worked hard to try to understand the difference. He says, Zeya Amizoam Karavis. Why do you ask a question of stira from two words that are really different? They sound the same, but they're different. There's Zeya and there's Mizoam. And they're not the same move because Mizoam means the body gives off a bad odor constantly, even when the person is not sweating. And that means that when the Kohen does the avodah, he's definitely going to sweat because there's going to be, he's definitely going to emit a foul odor. And that's the case of Mizuam. And Hosam Gabi Kohanim Efshar Li'abra B'Kiyura Decham. However, there is a way in the case of Kohanim to avoid the mum, to circumvent the mum. Because if his body gives off a bad odor constantly, and that would pass a lacuna, that's not the same as Zeya. Because if the body constantly emits a foul odor, there's nothing you can do about that. So we know that during the avodah he'll be in that Mizuam situation. But Zeya is different, says Rav Ashi. And it doesn't pass the Kohen, it only passes the Noshim. Why? Because there's a remedy for this profuse sweating, which gives off an odor, and that is you take, so to speak, a bath in very, very heavy acidy wine or vinegar. So the Kohen could dunk himself into this vinegar before he goes into the Beis Hamikdash. There's also a remedy for Reach Tenami. Efshar de Nokat Pilpul Befumin. If he puts a pepper into his mouth, it will remove that reach, and the Avodah Avodah, he can go ahead and do the Avodah. Isha lo efshar. Her husband is constantly in contact with her, and she cannot use these remedies 24/7. Again, I think Rav Ashi is more or less repeating what we had in Rav Yossi, but the only difference is that whereas Rav Yossi had two categories of Zeah, Rav Ashi is saying that there are two categories, one called Zuama and the other called Zeah. But I think conceptually they're identical. Hai Shuma Hechi Dam. The Brisa mentioned those three things that Pasal Nosha, three mumen, one of which was called Shuma. Ida is Beiseor. The Gemara says the following: if on top of this Shuma, I forgot the exact English word for Shuma. Shuma is a kind of like an opening in the body where hairs come out. Is hachav a hachav psola. Then even in the case of Kohanim, that would be a mum, as we'll soon see. The ida lowest they say, but if there's only shuma, but without actual hairs, you may have like little fuzz or something like that. Then once again, there's no difference between noshim and Kohanim. Shuma gdolahi hachav a hachav psola. Even by Kohanim, it's possible. So she has these long, shuma that's very large and takes over a certain cent, a circumference of a body, then it passes even Kohen. Why should it pass in the case of Nashim if it's a very small shum? It has no seir. The Sanya we learned with regard to moving that passel Kohen and the avodah something the shuma sheish plus seir harei zel mum. So we see that Shuma apostles, even a Kohen B'Torah's mum that has Seir. Ein plus Seir, it depends. Gdola Rezel mum, Kana Ein Zel mum. Ezi Shuma Gdola, what is the circumference of a Shuma that qualifies as Shuma Gdola and apostles even without Seir, even a Kohen? So they had a matbea that was made of silver, and it was the round circumference that Seir equals a Shuma Gedol. The round circumference of the Isa of that coin is the same as the round circumference of Shuma that makes it into Shuma Gedol, the apostles even coin. Okay, I don't have it here, but in Reb Chaim Kanevsky, he calculates the circumference of an Isra Italki. So the Gemara needs an answer now to discover where's the contrast between a move that passes between Noshim and Kohanim in the case of Shuma. Omer of Yossi Reb Chanina be'omedes al padachta, that she has Shuma on her forehead, which is an open exposed place. He has to look at his wife all the time, and even if it's a small Shuma, it throws him for a loop. So the Gemara asks immediately, wait a minute, if it's on her forehead, he saw it when he married her. Padachta Rav v'nispayesu, he accepted it when he decided to marry her. It's generally covered and not exposed because it's on the top of her head and she covers her head. But sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't. And since the husband will see his wife when she takes off her hair covering and the shuma is somewhat jarring for him, therefore it's a mum and it undermines the kiddush. I heard a din from an Adam Gadol Manu Rabbi Shilo. Nishacha Kala Kelev and Asamakomo Tzalekes Harezemum. If a woman is bitten by a dog and it leaves a scar, then that's called a mum. And again, we have a discussion here, how large of a scar is that? If a woman has like a male kind of a voice, a very thick, heavy voice, a razor mum, and it passes an isha, shenemar, because it says with regard to an isha in Shir Hashirim, ki kolecha reiv u'maref noveh. So we see that a woman has a nice, pleasant voice. Tani Rabbi Nosson Biro. Bein dadaya isha tefach. If her breasts are separated by a tefach, which is like 6 inches, that's also considered a mum. So Rav Acha Breder over Kamed Rav Ashi L'Neimar Tefach L'Mal Yusuf. Rav Acha, the son of Rav, thought, based on a brisa in front of Rav Ashi, that if she has an opening of a tefach spreading apart the breast, that's considered a malya. That's considered something beautiful. Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi says to Rav Acha, as far as this brisa is concerned, Gabi Mumin Tanya. It was defining a movement. It was Zeya, Reach, Peh, and this kind of tefach between her dadim. So how can you tell me that's considered noise? It's considered a move. The Gemara says, "V'kama, how much of a separation is there between her breasts?" And then it will be considered, because it's less than a tefach, will be considered beautiful, attractive. Amar Abaye, Sholoshes Bos. And here's a long discussion about why the Gemara goes into this issue about the attractive features of this. Tanya, we learned to the Bryce Rabbi Nosson, and we call Isha Shetader Gasim. She has very, very exceedingly large breasts. Mishal Chavosel, like none of the women have it. A razor move the Kama. How would be this large? This. Mama of the Sharia Babraid of Yeshub and Levish made of Yeshub and Levish Tefach. So the Gemara says the following: that you have a woman whose breasts are larger than other women by a full tefach. Like that's like like I remember Sam Schneider used to come with his esrog. It was always like the Yemenite esrog. It was like gigantic. So Gemara asked me, is there such an entity in the world? She had such large breasts, she was able to turn them over her back and nurse a baby. And now the Gemara adds another statement of Rav Maisha, the grandson of Rav Yeshua ben Levi, as an agadic digression. In the pasuk in Tehillim it says, "L'tzion Yomer Ish ve'ish yulad ba v'hu yichoneneu elyon." So this is, according to one pasuk, a discussion of Liyasid Lavo and a fulfillment of the prophecy of Yeshayahu, "Ve'heviu es kol achechem mikol hagoyim mincha Hashem." That the goyim will bring Am Yisrael from the Gola to Eretz Yisrael, and we'll find one of them will say B'nei Tzion, that, and this Gemara is going to compare someone who is Israeli to someone who comes from Chutz La'aretz. Mamar Masechet Miyosha bar Breder of Yeshua ben Levi. Who is this Ish that's indicated by the pasuk? It doesn't have to be someone who was born in Eretz Yisrael. It's someone who longs for Eretz Yisrael. And both of them, Lasid Lava, will be considered Baneha. Omer Abaye, Chad Minayu Odif Kitrei Minan. In other words, even though you're telling me that someone who lives in Chutzarts and has a sapir to see Tzion, you want to compare him to a Ben Eretz Yisrael, nevertheless, no. It's not a valid comparison because one of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael is considered weighty enough like two Chachmei Chutzarts. Says Rava, but the ball game is not over. This next paragraph of Rava is a pitch for Nefesh B'Nefesh. The Chad Minan Kisolik L'Hasam, if somebody from Chutzarts goes on Aliyat Eretz Yisrael, Adif Kitrei Minayu, which means he's worth 4 times his counterpart in Chutzarts. In Chachma, the Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Chia V'Chachlo Aviyodem Aikami Rabbanan. Here in Bavel, Rabbi Yirmiyah did not really understand the Chachamim in Bavel. He had many, many questions. But Kisolik L'Hasam, when he went on Aliyat Eretz Yisrael, Karilon Bavloi K'Shoy. He turned around to the Bavloim and he said, "You're a bunch of ignoramuses." Okay, now we get to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Ayin Hey Omen Aleph. And we're talking about a Nara who was married B'Cheskas Shleima Shein Ba Mumin, and then lo and behold, Hoya Ba Mumin, we find out that she does have Mumin. Now, when did we find this out? Is the Oda B'Beis Aviyah, she's still in her father's rishus. So now we have to figure out at what point was there later some movement? Was it before the Erusin or after the Erusin? Of course, the Baal says, I don't want to marry this woman. I want to divorce her because of the movement that she has. And he says, I don't want to even pay her the ksuba. Because if she had movement before the Erusin, he was tricked into marrying this woman. It's a mekatos. He would never, under those conditions, would have obligated himself to pay the ksuba. On the other hand, the Av has a counterclaim, and he says that these movement were noldu after the Erusin. That's called the stafka sadeh. It's like you buy a son that it was inundated. That's your problem. Is the Mishnah Paskins, the burden of the proof here in this case is on the shoulders of the father. Tzarech lavi raya. He's going to have to prove and establish his taina as true. Shemishin esarsa hoyu ba mumin alol. That it's only after the Erusin that these women were nolad. And if he can't prove that, then we have a right to assume that kan nimtza kain hoyu, meaning that whatever woman she has now, she had already the base of before she got married, and the stafka sadeh. I'm sorry, and here's the burden of proof to establish that the women were no ladim after the Erusin is stafka sadeh. Excuse me. Now, all this is in a case of Erusin. When after Erusin, let's say she goes to the Beis HaMerchatz and he sends, his female relatives, they check her out and she has movement. But Nichnas Oshus Abal, if he only discovers that she has movement after the Nisuin, Tzarech Lavi, right? Abal Tzarech Lavi. Now the burden of proof shifts over to the Baal if he wants to exempt himself from the Ksuba, and he has to prove that the movement was there ad shalom nisas even before the Erusin movement. And that's all divrei Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omer v'amed dvar mamurim. When does the Baal have a right to taina that these movement came before the Erusin? And again, this is a case where they discovered the movement after Erusin. He wants to say that the movement was there even before the Erusin, and therefore his mekach was a mekach tos. That's only the movement Shabbat. But if it's movement Shabbat Golui, then we assume he accepted it and he married it.